It is again my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Now, I was one of those little kids. I was so small when I was young that I didn't get to go to school till I was 7 years old because my parents wouldn't let me go to school because I was too small. And I grew up in a blue-collar town where you had to fight because everybody worked in the steel mills. Everybody was uneducated, just about, and so I started school late. And I knew I was smart because I could read when I went to school. I don't know how I learned that, but I could read when I got there. And I thought I was smart all the way through school until I went to the University of Chicago to get my PhD. Then I met some really smart people, like Barbara Sizemore. And I have been humble from that day forward. Barbara Sizemore picked up a book in Latin and started reading it when she was in high school. They had no instruction in it at all. Barbara Sizemore went to Northwestern University in the days when you could not live on the campus of Northwestern University, and graduated from Northwestern University summa cum laude in classics when she was 19. Okay? That's when I found out what it meant to be really smart. Okay? We were the only two African Americans in a special program at the University of Chicago when I first met her, and it gave me the appropriate humility about learning and about brightness from then on. Barbara earned her PhD at the University of Chicago, as I did. She had distinguished career as an educator in elementary and secondary education. She's taught everything at every level. She was an elementary principal, one of the outstanding ones in Chicago, and against my advice, took a tough high school in Chicago and turned it around. The superintendent promised her that he was going to give her the resources that she needed to do it. I told her he was lying. I was right. She took the school anyway, and she turned it around and all of that. She became superintendent in Washington, D.C. She finished one phase of her career at Pitt, where she became a department chairman, a professor in several departments, and director of research, and thought she was going to retire and write books. However, the president of DePaul University in Chicago knew about Barbara and talked her out of retirement, told her to come and take over the deanship of the College of Education, and he would back her because their number one priority was to improve public education in Chicago. Barbara came out, she took it, she just retired from the second phase of her career and is getting ready to start the third phase of her career in education now. She is a tireless advocate for poor people. She is a tireless advocate for black children and youth getting the kind of quality education they need. And it is my great pleasure to present to you my friend and colleague and one of the brightest people I have ever met in my life, Barbara Sizemore.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is now 5 minutes to 10. I was supposed to start at 9:40. I'm a university professor programmed for 50 minutes. I'm going to do my best not to do that. There are certain characteristics of the African American community which have been consistent throughout my adult years. Last year, I celebrated my 50th year as a teacher in the United States of America. These consistencies are: racism, or the belief in white supremacy, has been relentless and persistent throughout these 50 years. The absence of unity among African Americans in their pursuit of freedom and equality has been consistent. And the belief in education and God as the preferred means for that pursuit has steadily diminished. When I was a young girl in the 1930s and 1940s, African Americans, we were called Negroes or colored people then, had strong convictions about the pursuit of freedom and equality, which Reverend Flake has talked about this morning from his parents. My parents, born in the vicious years of Jim Crow, 1905 and 1907, when Negroes were lynched, and Mary McLeod Bethune once thought there was a chance for President Roosevelt to pass an anti-lynching law. But it never happened. But my parents fought against apartheid and Jim Crow because they believed in God and education. They believed in that old song, I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's standing by the water, I shall not be moved. And they had faith in God and the future. As you know, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And this faith bolsters self-confidence and lifts self-esteem, but more than anything else, it nourishes the human spirit. And friends, it pays to be intelligent. Nobody wants to be dumb. But it is the human spirit that overcomes obstacles, like poverty, like racism, and sexism. There are 5 levers of power in a capitalist democracy: God, dollars, votes, knowledge, and guns. African Americans have all of these. And what keeps us from being successful is the lack of a unity among us to persist and stand like the tree by the water. I call this a degeneration of our spirit, and we must get it back. In 1997, Bernie Watson states in his book, Colored Black Negro Chasing the American Dream, says this: a different reality has set in at this writing. The African American community is now well represented in positions of power and responsibility. Look at us, look at us, look at us. Yet problems remain. Simultaneously, the country appears to be tired of confronting problems, and many political leaders seem eager to return to the good old days of intact families, quiet small towns, good education, jobs for everyone, and perfect harmony. These good old days never existed. That dimly remembered past is only a fantasy. The opposition, end of quote, the opposition to racism has caved in, as Bernie tells us in his book. Racism through Jim Crow relegated Negroes to poverty then as now, and preventing poverty will require redefinitions and a redistribution of opportunity for all people. These are the future challenges of public education. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a little bit of control over public education. We have absolutely no control over private education. None. The reason we do not understand this is because we do not understand capitalism. Look, we say and teach our children that we fight wars for democracy. Stop telling this lie to your children. We don't fight wars for democracy, we fight wars for capitalism. That is what is the essence of the American dream. The dollars have in God we trust on them, but it's not God we spend. It's not God we save. Your human spirit is not in your bank account. I'm not against dollars, don't get me wrong. but that's not where your heart is. And where your heart is where your treasure is. Right? You can have money and be poor. Oh yeah, I know people who got plenty of money. It's in a $40,000 Lexus in the garage. It's in $10,000 fur coats, $20,000 diamond rings. But money is important. And if you're going to make it in the United States, if we're going to make it as a group in the United States of America, we've got to better understand capitalism and what it means, because that is the essence. I want to thank Bernie Watson and Mona Risco for recommending me to participate in this very important conference, because the future of public education must be responsive to the needs of capitalism now that capitalism is the dominant economic system in the world. And you must understand that capitalism means that it's an economic system which guarantees that the goods and services, the ownership and distribution of goods and services is private. That's privately owned. It's privately owned. It's privately owned. It's privately owned. If I own the company, my son does not have to take a test to be vice president. The future of public education must be responsive to capitalism. And if we as a people are going to survive, we must be responsive to capitalism, or we will die in the prison system which has been constructed to contain African American men, especially now that they are armed. The future of public education must also be responsive to the changing demographics in the United States. Oh, Reverend Flake is so right. Let your children learn to speak Spanish. For God's sake, let your children learn to speak Spanish. They're going to have to talk to Spanish-speaking people. Some of these Spanish-speaking people are black. Puerto Ricans are citizens, and many Mexican Americans are. Now, the chief goal of capitalism is to make a profit by any means necessary. So these 4 tiers that Reverend Flake talked about in public schools are going to just merely replicate themselves in private schools. They're going to be the schools that cost $20,000. So if the state gives you a $7,000 voucher, you got to come up with $13,000 to get in that high-tier school. Then there are going to be schools that cost you $15,000. Then you got to come up with $8,000. Then there are going to be schools that cost $12,000. Then you got to come up with $5,000. And then there are going to be schools that cost $7,000 and less. Guess who's going to be in those schools? No, ladies and gentlemen, we made a big mistake in desegregation. I tried hard to keep it from happening, but it couldn't happen. Oh, people get caricatures of me. Some of you are old enough to remember. Had my big bandana around my head, and here comes Aunt Jabarbara. I know you don't, some of you are too young, you don't remember that. But what I kept trying to tell people is we can't buy into a desegregation policy that says that all black is all bad. We can't do it. We can't do it. We can't do it. And we cannot buy into a voucher system that says that you get $7,000 and you buy what you can. Can't buy it. Can't do it. Can't do it. We can't do it. We can't do it. We got to think this thing through carefully. Oh, I agree with Reverend Flake that we need to debate this issue. I'm not here to be an apologist for public schools, but I do want to tell you that public schools can be better. They can be better. Now, generally, as African Americans, we're very confused about the economic system and capitalism. We don't know too much about how you make money and less about how you keep it. But that doesn't mean that we can't learn. It doesn't mean that we can't learn. And it doesn't mean that we can't teach our children. The main areas of concern in private and public education for African Americans are accountability. That is, how do we know that every American knows what she or she should know? How do we know that every school is reaching that goal? We call that accreditation. How do we know that school employees are reaching this goal? That is certification experience. You got a lot of private schools and parochial schools in Chicago that hire people who are not even certified to teach. Governance. Who should rule and how? Who should determine what is taught to whom and how? Curriculum. What should every American know? How should every American be taught? And finance. How should schools be financed and who pays? Those are the questions. Last, how are teachers recruited and principals and people who work in public schools? Ron Edmonds said in the 1970s, we know everything we need to know to teach all of the children of all of the people, especially if their education is important to us. I stand here before you to tell you there are mountains of data, ladies and gentlemen, mountains of data of public schools where people like you and me are in them teaching our children, and where our children are passing these tests, as my grandmother used to say. Let me tell you about some of them that I'm recently worked with.